Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another installment, another dialogue as a part of the series, Am I Okay? I am your host for today's discussion, Pastor Amanda Hawley, and I am super excited about today's topic, dynamics in ministry, flyers, tokens, and COVID. Oh my. So we're going to have a wonderful conversation today. But before I jump to more about that and to introducing our panelists, I want to take this time to let you know that registration for PELC 2020 is open. Yes. So while COVID has been changing the game in a lot of things and everybody has had to shift and pivot, we at the Pastoral, Evangelism, and Leadership Council, we have pivoted as well. So all you have to do is visit pelc2020.com and you can begin to register. Early bird registration is open, and right now it is $19, but that is only until the end of this month. So I encourage you all to visit the website today. Go ahead and register. There's going to be amazing seminars, phenomenal singers, still that same PELC experience where you can be encouraged, revived, refreshed, and equipped to continue to do ministry. So we just wanted to promote that. The theme this year is Selah, Strength for the Struggle. So make sure you visit pelc2020.com and you can get all of the information and register today. Registration is open. So let's begin to introduce our panelists. Today we have with us Pastor Michelle Hill, Pastor Kimberly Bulgin, Pastor Esther Knott, and then on the flyer we had Pastor Chanda Nunez, and I want to ask that you all would keep her in your prayers. She is the lead pastor at Pacific Union College Church, and as many of you have been following, the fires have really been going close to that area, and so she was able to reach me this morning via text to let me know that because of the fire damage, they're without Wi-Fi. So she was not able to be a part of this discussion that I know she was really looking forward to. So let's continue to keep Pastor Nunez, Pacific Union College Church, just that entire area in your prayers as they're dealing with the damage from those fires. But we still have some amazing panelists and we're still going to have an awesome discussion. So I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves quickly one by one, and then we're going to jump into dynamics in ministry. So with us, we have Pastor Michelle Hill.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Pastor Michelle Hill, and I have the privilege of pastoring in the Bermuda Conference. I currently serve as the pastor of the Pembroke Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Church on the Hill, and I also serve as the Women's Ministries and Prayer Ministries Director for the Bermuda Conference. And so I'm delighted to be here this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Pastor Hill. We have with us as well, Pastor Esther Knott.
Good afternoon, everyone. My current job is I'm an associate with the NAD Ministerial, that's North American Division Ministerial Association, and part of that responsibility includes overseeing the MA in Pastoral Ministry. We have about 300 pastors across the division that are in that program. I've been a pastor for 33 years. Started in 1980, and because of my job, I also volunteer as a pastor at my local church. So my job is to be a pastor to pastors across the division, and I still get my fulfillment by being involved locally.
Awesome. Thank you. And we look forward to just your perspective lending to this discussion. And last but certainly not least, we have Pastor Kimberly Bulgin.
Hello, everybody. I am privileged to serve under the Central States Conference, and I am pastoring the New Beginnings SDA Church in Wichita, Kansas. Just started actually in March, so it's a fairly new assignment. And I also have a ministry for women that are recovering from sexual trauma called the Love God, Love Sex movement. I'm a part of that as well. I help to inspire and empower women to embrace their sexuality in ways that don't compromise their faith or their values. So I'm truly happy to be here as well to participate in this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. So as you all can see, we have a very, very strong panel, and I'm excited to jump into all of this. We really wanted to take some time to just look at some of the dynamics that come with being female clergy in ministry, but to kind of couch it in this COVID experience, because that's kind of been the anchor for all of our conversations. So I want to jump in and just, open up the floor with asking you all, how do you think COVID has impacted the perspective of women in pastoral ministry and in leadership, particularly at the local level? Right, and there was silence. Okay, so yes, go ahead.
I think that COVID has definitely given us more visibility because we have various platforms that have emerged and evolved in a very powerful way. And I think that we have definitely have a greater visibility because of COVID.
Yeah. And I think continuing on that line, one of the things that, some people have expressed in terms of, not knowing, I don't know who, the female pastors are, especially from lay members. They may know who's in their area, in their region, in their immediate conference, but unless they really pay attention to pastors, they're not going to know, oh, Pastor Hill, you're all the way in Bermuda, Pastor Kim, you're all the way in Kansas, Pastor Knott, you've been serving, for 30 years. And then now, you're working with the NAD, like they're not going to know these things. So I think COVID, what do you think, COVID has done in terms of giving more exposure and just really creating this platform? Yes, Esther.
One of the things I was going to say too, because now the people can be live streamed anywhere and they're promoting events, I've said to pastors it's important that they put what time zone they're in, because I have a friend, she does a cooking school, and we see it on Facebook, but she in the Rocky Mountain Conference. So because we're becoming not just across the division, but we're becoming global, it's good that when we're promoting an event, just like you did with this one, you do designate the time zone, because more people are watching now because of the new platforms.
Yeah.
I too would just say exposure. I think that it's been a blessing to be able to receive from other women in different parts of the world and experience their ministry and what they're doing, and being able to be open to that. I think it's been a blessing. And I think also, as was said, I think a lot of people are realizing that there are a lot more women in ministry than they initially thought of, which I think is a blessing for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's allowing our denomination as a whole, to see the different faces, talents, and giftedness that comes not just with only female clergy, but even, with male clergy. Like, it's really equalizing everything. So instead of restricting everyone to being, strictly being stuck with what's regional, now you have this opportunity to, see people in action all over the world, and definitely all over the country. But I think with that exposure, there's come some challenges. There's come some challenges with this exposure when we put this, in context of, especially what's happening here in the States. There's a lot of, social unrest. And I think overall, there's a heightened sensitivity, especially to, some of our younger denominational members, the millennials, Generation Z, in terms of equality and representation. So as things are opening up now and you're able to look and see what all of these other churches are doing in a positive way, now you're also able to see what all of these other churches are doing in perhaps a not so positive way. So another, element for us to discuss is, I'm not sure if you've been following, but there's been, some backlash with various flyers in terms of events, whether it's panels, weekends, weeks of prayers, revivals, because everybody's been shifting now to being online, and it's a lot easier now. I can call you here, there, and everywhere. We all just join on Zoom or join on whatever platform that we want to use. And now, we can put together, these amazing events and have, the speakers that I want and this and that. And what's been happening because of that is there's been some backlash. And so I definitely want to open up the floor, and let's kind of dig into, what is your take on, this backlash that has occurred with events and series flyers that have all male speakers? Because, people on Facebook have been very vocal about how they feel about it, good, bad, and different. So I wanted to open that up.
I think it's been great. As messy and as uncomfortable as it may be, I think it has been a necessary push in the right direction to highlight the issue of there being underrepresentation of women in ministry. So is it the best way, for people to be dragged, as they say, online? I mean, that could probably be debated, but I think that the attention that is being brought is needed, is necessary. And I think, when I get calls from my male colleagues, saying, I don't want anybody to call my name on social media. So, let me make sure I got a woman on the call. I guess to that, I figure, it's working to some degree. I don't know if it's necessarily the best thing. We can talk about that, but I think it's definitely a needed conversation. And I'm glad that it's happening, as messy and difficult and as uncomfortable as it may be.
Go ahead, Esther. Yeah.
Just wanted to kind of tell you a funny story, because, when we're used to seeing a normal world that has men and women in it, when you see something that just has men, it pops out. And I was recently speaking for some pastors at a pastors meeting. I was the only female in the room, but they were in the process of finding a new president. And so in my prayer, I used gender inclusive language. I said he or she, and then in the middle of my prayer, I caught myself, because it's not policy. I'm grateful for Sandra Roberts that she is president of her conference, but I caught myself, and in my prayer, I said, "Oh, sorry," to God. So, because when we're used to a normal world where it's men and women, it becomes a habit. And so when we see a flyer that's all just one gender, we see that it looks like there's something wrong. What's wrong with this picture? Go ahead, Pastor Hill.
Well, I definitely think that it has engaged a conversation, a necessary conversation. And the ratio to male pastors to female pastors is tremendous. However, it has brought an awareness and challenged us. And that is how things evolve. That's how we grow. That's how we improve when we're challenged. And so these flyers that are all male challenge us right before us to say, how can we balance that? And I'm not saying we're going to move into that conversation about tokenism. We don't have to have a token woman, but a woman that is capable, that can be effective. And so we need to be considered on all perspectives. And so I definitely think that it's a difficult conversation, but a necessary conversation, because this whole movement of women in ministry in our church has been a process, and we continue to evolve in that process. And we grow, we morph, and we get better. And this is a part of it. And sometimes things are painful. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's a challenge. But good is going to come out of it, because we are on a journey to ensure that women in ministry have the balance, that we have the fairness, and all of those things that we've been discussing for so many years. And so I just see it as a part of the process. Growth comes, and sometimes it's not pleasant. But I think that this is an opportunity for us to continue to evolve and grow as a denomination, and to confront those things that are not fair, and those things that are not just, and those things that need to be talked about. And so, that's my perspective on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think part of it is that people want to be inclusive, but they don't always know who the people are that can speak. And so even in the secular world, sometimes it's women letting people know about other women who are capable in this area. But it's even stronger when our male colleagues say, hey, I know Pastor Amanda, and she has experience in this area. Because I don't want to be invited just to be the token. If that's what gets us in the door, okay. Well, I don't mind being a token because it gives people exposure. It's like, wow, I had no idea that Pastor Kim was such a great presenter. So I'll take the tokenism, and it's an opportunity for us to show people our heart that's like Jesus's heart. You know, we share the same desire to take the gospel to the world. And I think it takes both male and female to represent what God is like. And wow, we have a beautiful opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Really quickly, before I come to you, Pastor Kim, there's something that that Pastor Knott, you said earlier that I kind of want to jump on, where when I looked at, I personally call them flyer wars. When I looked at them, I think the point that you mentioned in terms of we live in a world where women have advanced further than where women have advanced in the church. And, that is, I think, for our members, those that are, not in any type of leadership position, they live in that world, where they see women at varying levels of authority, leadership, influence. And then, to now go to, church, which is supposed to be, the most important, and seeing that disconnect where it's not similar. I think that is what's really fueling this backlash. And I think it puts pressure on us as a church to realize that, the answers that have been given and the explanations that have been given for such a long time, members are really rising up and saying, but that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to, permit women to go to seminary, to hire them, to give, but then to not include them, at the table or on flyers or, in other events, to just kind of, really put limits in terms of, you can come in, but you can only come this far, or then maybe we'll move, the bar a little bit further. And I think that, when I look at the flyer wars, what's behind that is I really see this tension mounting, this pressure mounting, where people are seeing this dissonance between this is the world that I live in, this is the church that I see, and I don't like the difference between the two. And it's something that we're going to have to continue to wrestle with. Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, a couple things. I take notes here. I think most men in ministry know women that can preach. I don't think it's a matter of, I didn't know. I don't think that's what the issue is. I think it's more men and even some women having to confront their beliefs and values about how they are going to include women in their ministry. And so I don't know if I could pose this question. I think the tension is that there are quite a few of my colleagues that do include women in their ministry exploits for their churches. I guess they're wrestling with, every time do I put a flyer out, do I have to have women on there every single time? Because I may have women, for the month of July, I may have 2 women on my flyer then, but then I may do another event the next month and there may be all men on that. And then they get dragged, but they're like, but I just had, 3 women preach for me for my revival last week. So why am I, I'm supportive. I do. So that's the tension, but there's that. But I also want to say, I don't know if men can necessarily use the excuse all the time, or women, that they're not asking women to preach because they don't know anybody that can. I feel like that's a major cop out. But at the same time, for the guys that do include their women, other women, I don't know if there's an answer to, is it all the time? Is it some of the time?
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question up here on the screen. Where have you seen the most resistance, and why do you believe that is so?
Resistance where?
I believe that it was coming in the context of, I guess just in the context of this, this conversation in terms of women being on flyers and being included in, in events. I know for me, I don't know if I would use the word resistance. I think the challenge is kind of what Pastor Kim stated, where now the question is becoming how often, every single time I do something, do I have to include a female? I think so for those, for the men clergy that are supportive, it's a question of how often, because again, you have to look at, the numbers, in terms of the number, just the sheer number of pastors in general. And then if I had something last month, with a significant number, of women, do I have to every single time have that? And I think that's where there can be some people are landing in different places in terms of, I had a woman preach for me at the beginning of the year, like I'm good. Whereas other pastors are like, no, I had a woman speak for me, at my last event. And so this event, I want to go in a different direction. So I think you're seeing men land in different places in terms of answering that question. And I think within that can creep up some resistance. But anything else, ladies?
And I think for me personally, so this is where I've landed. I'm not personally putting out flyers of all men if it's 3 or more. That's just been my personal, I've taken that personal stance as a senior pastor that's just not what I'm going to do. And I've also said to myself that I'm also not sharing flyers, I don't care who you are, when it's, just a majority male flyer. Regardless, I mean, I understand that there may be reasons why they decided to go that route, but that's just a personal stance that I've decided to take in the spirit of advancing more representation of women in ministry. And I've also decided that sometimes I may have to go outside the scope of even Adventism at times, or outside the scope of a woman that's a pastor, to bring more women onto to like different ministry events that I may be having. I maybe have. Look at that, I can't talk today. But I'm doing that because I personally have an investment in seeing more women exposed in ministry in healthy ways. So, as you said, there are other people that may have a different perspective, that they may feel like it's okay to have a woman preach just for Women's Day once a year. And I think with pushing back against that mindset that it's only like once a quarter or once a year, I feel like that's just not going to cut it in this season anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, Pastor Knott.
Yeah, so what Kim was saying is that there aren't as many women pastors. I think we calculated once at NAD that there are about 4% of the pastors are female. And so it's going to be hard to pull them in and to find what those are, have an expertise in the area that you're trying to talk about. And I think it also depends upon the demographic or the area of the country that you're in. Because when Kim said that, every pastor knows a female that can preach, we're the part of some of the places where I travel, I'm the first female pastor that people have heard. They've never met a female pastor. So there's still work to do in many different parts of our country. Not everybody knows a female pastor or has heard them preach.
Mm-hmm. And I think before we move a little bit further in the discussion, that's why I wanted to kind of open up this discussion with looking at, I guess, one of the, benefits, not that there's a ton, but one of the benefits from COVID, is now if you are interested, whether you're a male clergy or just a member, it doesn't matter what your sex is. Now you really have the opportunity to see who else is there, if this is something that matters to you. And I think this is where, now we're going to shift into, this whole premise of tokenism, if supporting women in ministry and really continuing to, trailblaze and push and promote women in ministry, if that truly matters to you, now more than ever, you have the opportunity to really see who's in your area, who's in the field, because now, everybody's having to be online, and even if you're having service in your building, most of those services are just live streamed and you're not having, members and attendees in the building. So now, COVID is really kind of pushing and changing, the dynamics for everybody. It's requiring people that, if you're going to speak and say and complain about something, that you do need to do research, because, there have been pastors who I know, personally, I know that they support women in ministry. This particular event, they did not have, a female on the flyer. And then now everyone's coming for their neck. And I'm like, people they don't fully know and understand. And so now, like, this excuse of, I'm not sure, I don't know, they're not around me. If this is something that really matters to you, everything is being pushed in that virtual sphere. And that really is being taken away. And people are crying that out as well. If you don't know something, look it up, research it, call, ask around if it's of value. But this is really kind of highlighting, is it a value as much as people say, it's a value. But let's go ahead and dig deeper.
Amanda, I just wanted to add to that COVID, you asked about that as the initial question, and COVID has exposed this weakness and this imbalance and has highlighted. We have, a circulation of flyers like never before. Everything is virtual. And so before you could hide and you could continue to exclude women, but this is forcing us to be inclusive because we have the evidence before us. You open up Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever platform that you use, and you see that, we need to continue on. We need to correct this. And before COVID, we weren't challenged like that because we didn't have physical evidence. And so I just wanted to add that we are challenged and we have to continue to wrestle with this. Inclusion needs to be an important part of where we're going in the Adventist church. This conversation continues to go on and on, but right now with this current circumstance with COVID, we are confronted and we need to do better.
Yeah. So let me ask you, ladies, how do you decipher between representation, representation matters, and tokenism, where, I just want to fill this spot? So how do you decipher between the two when it comes to, speaking requests, panel requests, and really how do you feel about that?
I think tokenism is putting people in a position without any concern for their gifting, their talent, their expertise. Let's just throw a woman into this spot without giving any consideration of her capability. Whereas representation, I think, is about putting women in a spot that, will be able to honor the gift that God has given them and put them in a space to be able to do well, as opposed to just throwing them in there for the sake of putting a woman on a flyer.
And then even to add to what Kim is saying, sometimes we're included, but then there is evidence that, we're just being included just to sort of fulfill this gender situation. I've seen a situation where there was a woman on a panel and they were overtly prejudiced against her. They excluded her, the camera wasn't on her. They said to her at the end, okay, now you can pray. And so there are variances, and you can't always gauge the motive when you're invited. But I think Kim said it, when we are called to celebrate our gifts and so that we can do what God has anointed and gifted us to do, then that's important. But to just include a woman to say, well, we have a woman and she's not effective, is a setup and sometimes is antithetical to what we are really trying to do. Because when you put a woman on there just to put a woman and then it goes south, then it creates even more challenges.
I think that sometimes they might put a woman on just because they want to be open now. And so they will include a woman. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And even if it's a token at first, that's getting us a foot in the door. And then if we're that woman that they've asked to be on there, then do your research, be the best that you can be, and then be assertive enough to speak up. And if you have concerns that you're just being a token, talk to the presenter. My experience has been very positive. My male colleagues go out of the way to include me in things and to give me a voice. And I know that's not everybody's experience, but there are lots of positive ways that people who generally want to include women are making it a positive experience for them. But we have to do our part. But if being a token gets your foot in the door, then do a fantastic job to represent the fact that we're capable and competent.
Yeah. And I think that brings up, and I use the word tension, because I don't want to speak I can only speak for myself. I know that there have been some opportunities that have been given to me just because I was available and I was a female, and as much as it made me cringe on the inside, I don't want to be anybody's token. It's like, you know what? It did give me a foot in the door, so it's like, all right, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take up as much space as I can. I'm not going to just sit in the corner and be quiet. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be involved. I'm going to be engaged. But I think as I grow and as I shift, now I'm also getting to a place where I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. And this is just, me, Amanda, and I think every, female clergy are landing in different places across the board concerning this. I think this displays the reality of where our church is, is that there is this element of tokenism. So sometimes you're like, man, I know I'm going to be the token, but I also think that there's also space now to be like, you know what, I'm not, or I choose not to be, so as much as, I'm grateful that you have given me this invitation. However, I'm going to decline, and I think it's, this is also showing to our denomination at large that these are some of the challenges that they may not realize, that when you're trailblazing, when I could use the word integrating, when you're coming into something as a minority in numbers, that you have to, pick and choose and really look at it with open eyes in terms of what really is my role, what do I feel my role is, and what do they think my role is? And taking that power and saying, you know what, not this time. I choose to not participate in that manner. Yeah, Kim, and then we'll circle back to Esther and then Pastor Hill.
Yeah, you touched on something, because as you were speaking, I just was like, yes, the burden of trailblazing. And I take that word lightly because we have the great Pastor Knott in our presence.
Yes.
With pastoring.
Longevity.
Right? So we stand on your shoulders for sure, Pastor Knott, right? So I don't even really, in the presence of Pastor Knott, I don't really consider myself to be a trailblazer, but I also do feel the exhaustion and the overwhelm of having, because there's so few women, that you always end up being asked. And I think, Amanda, what you're speaking to is, I think it's okay as well as women, even though, yes, we have to, create exposure and representation and create opportunities for other women coming before us. But we also have to be mindful of our own mental health, of our own time, of our spiritual health, and not run ourselves into the ground either. And so for those reasons, I am becoming a bit more selective about where I choose to speak and what I choose to do. And then I think what also helps me is being able to say, hey, I'm not able to do this right now, but let me put you in touch with Pastor Hill. Let me put you in touch with Pastor Hawley. Let me put you in touch, let me go through my roster and see this person may work for this event, but I'm not going to be able to do it this time because of whatever reason. So it's definitely a burden for sure to have to continue to be on these flyers, but also managing the tension of taking care of yourself too.
Kim, I just wanted to say to that point about that tension, it's rough because we don't always get opportunity. And coming along, the advice is take as many opportunities as you can get. Don't turn them down, because that's your opportunity. That's the platform for exposure. And you're absolutely right. And then we get into this thing and we are overwhelmed and burdened. And it is a struggle, because we want to be able to fulfill these engagements, but how much is too much? How much is enough? And so that is definitely a great point.
Yeah, Pastor Knott.
So sometimes when we're invited to speak on a panel or at some meetings, and we're there because we're a token, sometimes men will resent that because they know that a female is being included because the organization wanted a female, and the male pastor says, well, why wasn't I asked? And it's only that we were only asked because we were female. So there can be that resentment that we have to deal with as well. And, I grew up that you don't ask to be on something, people invite you to be. So there's a humility that needs to come. And so I guess I get uncomfortable when female pastors appear to be pushing themselves. I really think that needs to come from outside of us. And I think like one of you mentioned that it's people who saw things posted on Facebook, professionals in other areas, both men and women, they were the ones that were commenting. So I think that when it comes from our members and the community that sees there's not that representation, for me, I'm more comfortable with that than to me, it's just not attractive when female pastors seem to be pushing themselves.
Interesting.
I don't know. I guess I maybe have a different perspective. I don't know if I would look at it as pushing, but maybe building relationships, networking, and I don't know if that's the same as pushing myself. I don't know if I would make a woman feel bad for putting herself out there. I may have to wrestle with that a bit more, just because of the nature of the space that we're in. I guess it's a delicate balance. I think I can support women that leverage the relationships that they've built to get into certain spaces. And I can also respect women that have kind of just said, I'm going to wait for people to ask me. I'm going to wait for people to just see what I do. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think there's probably room for both. But I guess I've leaned maybe more towards developing relationships with people that have platforms that I wanted to be a part of, and I leveraged those relationships and leaned into those and created opportunities for myself so that I could create opportunities for others. And I think, and there's also room for the other flip side of that, which is the Lord. But I just let the Lord do it, and I don't know if there's necessarily one that's better than the other. It's just it is what it is.
Yeah. So Kim, I don't think we're saying different things, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I wouldn't want a woman, personally, I wouldn't want a woman to be known to be saying, well, why didn't they ask me? Or they should have included me. If they want to say, hey, you could have included Amanda in that. That's different than saying, than getting a reputation for always being, I'm using a word that somebody else used about another woman. She's always belligerent on committees. She's a female pastor. And that's not helping her. I've said to her, well, make your point, and then people know, and then move on from there. Don't keep insisting on that it has to be just the way that you want. So there's a balance.
Okay. Just so I just want to bring some clarity, I think, to the point that you're trying to make, Pastor Knott. So you're saying that it should not be self-promotion. I'm going to include that in there. So you're saying that, it's not a challenge if, as a female pastor, you're saying, hey, you should include women, not necessarily me, but, there's, I can give you a list of individuals that have experience or expertise in this area, and you should be inclusive. So that is okay. But what you're saying, makes you uncomfortable, as if I were to go to somebody and say, hey, why didn't you put me on the flyer and include me? Is that, I just want to clarify, because I'm looking at some comments. And so I just want to be, I want people to be clear on, on what it is you're saying.
Absolutely. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I would go up to Pastor Wilson, the one who, plans Pelk, Jesse, and say, how come you didn't include me on the flyer for, Pelk? But I do think it's wise to develop relationships, and relationships, I think, is key. I don't think that's self-promoting. I think that's just being wise. Networking is important. I think every woman in ministry needs to decide for themselves how willing they are to engage with gatekeepers and key people that have the power to say, we're going to invite this person, or we're going to invite you. I think that's a part of the conversation as well. You can't complain that you never get asked to do anything, but you're not, seizing opportunities to get to know the people that make these things happen. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think, just to, I don't want us to stay here too long, because we have about 15 minutes left, but, this always brings up the interesting element of really of self-promotion, self-promotion, networking, where are the lines in terms of, that's okay, that's not okay. We can have a whole separate conversation on that, because, men can do that and it looks one way, a woman does it and it looks another way, to women and to men, so I do want to jump to a question, which is kind of similar, a question that was posted earlier. And they is from one of our viewers asking, how do Jesse Wilson, how do the panelists deal with female opposition to their pastoral ministry in the local church? Because we did kind of want to segue in that direction.
I'll respond to years of pastoral ministry. I call it my life text. It's a text that is your go-to for situations in your life. And mine's from Romans 12:10. And it says in their RSV, outdo one another in showing honor. Outdo one another in showing honor. So for me, whenever I've met opposition, I just try to outdo that person, but by showing honor to them. It's kind of like when the Bible says about heaping coals of fire on a person's head. So I worked in Michigan Conference for 16 years of my pastoral ministry. And often people say, how did you survive in Michigan? I've had such a wonderful experience working here. But when I find that there's a pastor who doesn't think that women should be ordained or women should be pastors, regardless of ordination, I go out of my way to get to know them as a person. So the relationship is not based only on this one issue and how we may be different on the issue. There are commonalities that will bind us and bond us together. And that's what I try to focus on. And people in my congregation, if I know that they have a problem with me in that role, which has not been often, I will go out of my way to minister to them.
Pastor Hill.
Initially, when I was initiated into ministry, it was a tremendous struggle, and there was a lot of adversity and a lot of opposition. But over the years, I think I've adapted to the environment, and I think the environment has changed, because when we approach ministry with the intent of lifting up Jesus Christ and preaching the gospel, people will react in various ways. They'll either get over it or get on board with you. And so that question today, where I am as a pastor at my church and in this conference and in this world, I'm not challenged. I don't even think about it too much. I don't give too much energy to the question about how people feel. I think that it has been so divisive. It has drained so much energy. It has distracted from mission. And so how do I cope with it in the local field? I just do what God has called me to do. And I think that is the Ebenezer that we continually go back to when we are challenged, questioned, when people reject us. God called us. And if God called me, and if God is with me, then who can be against me? And so, yes, we're concerned. We want to build relationships, but I'm not really overly concerned with trying to win people. That's God's job. That's the Holy Spirit's job. And so for any woman coming into ministry and considering pastoral ministry, it is a challenge. But when God equips you and he calls you, he equips you, and we just move forward with positivity, because I think that it's a negative when we are continually contemplating who's not with us and who's against us. Those people are always going to be. There are always going to be negative detractors. There are always going to be people who challenge our ministry. But the energy and the effort that is put into combating that and answering to these people, when I've decided in my own life, I just answer to God. And I'm in a happy place because of that, because God called each one of us to this ministry thing, and we answer to him. We work we move at the beat of his drum. And, those people that are not on board, then we continue to pray for them. And I believe that the Holy Spirit works on people. When I became the pastor of this church, there was tremendous opposition. But some of those people that were vehemently opposed to me are very much with me. And I didn't approach my assignment with, well, I'm going to show these people, I'm going to prove who Michelle Hill is. I just rolled up my sleeve and preached the gospel, loved ferociously on my congregation, and that moves mountains. And I think with the whole journey that we've been on, to be distracted by the negative has been our greatest deficiency. And it has taken away from mission. We've spent hours and hours and hours talking about women's ordination and women in ministry, and those are very important things. But the women that are called to ministry need to preach with power, need to pastor ferociously, and just demonstrate by our works that God has called us. And I just wanted to add this one thing, because we moved on, but the tokenism, what the enemy means for evil, God always works it out for good. And so if somebody puts you in a place as a setup or not with good motives, if you get there and you preach with power and authority, no one can deny your anointing. No one can disappoint you when God has appointed you. And so we just need to focus on the positive and continue to walk in our calling as women of God and our anointing, because when God is for us, nobody on this earth can be against us. Come on, Kim.
Hallelujah. What I'm learning is in moments where there's resistance, and somebody asked, is there more resistance from men or from women in the local church? For me, I think it's more women. We all may have a different experience, but I tend to find that I get more resistance from women than men, and not that, just in generally speaking. But what I'm learning, and when it comes to operating in my call, is to really play to my strength, the things that I'm really good at, and working from that angle, obviously, drenched in the power of the Holy Spirit, like Pastor Hill said, but not really so focusing on what my weaknesses are, but utilizing what my strengths are. So, the fact that I'm empathetic, the fact that I love to preach, the fact that I love to teach, the fact that I can be nurturing when I'm ready, and utilizing those strengths and utilize that to build relationships and to overcome any hurdles. But like Pastor Hill says, I can't really focus on the negativity and the resistance and the problems. I'm going to focus more on what God has blessed me with and what he has put on the inside of me, and let that kind of hopefully work through any kinks that we may have in the local church as it relates to me being the pastor and them having a problem with it. So that's what's helped me, playing to my strengths and really capitalizing on what God has blessed me with, and not focusing so much on the weaknesses and the negativity.
Yeah, I just want to add one quick thing, and then I'll come to you, Pastor Knott. Just, I agree with everything that you all have said. What surprised me the most personally was how much I had to bolster my self-care. And I think, if I could just add anything, to the comments that have been said, yes, standing tall, knowing that God has called me, not another human being, knowing that, my gifts will make room for me, evaluating and knowing what I'm good at, and knowing how to, lead with my strengths, and how to, I guess, kind of augment, the areas that I'm not strong with. But what really struck me was just having to make sure that self-care, taking that time to really just decompress, making sure that I'm not harboring, anger, resentment, because, comments and things can be said. And yeah, in the moment, I can have tough skin and, push through the meeting, push through, the conversation, push through the event. But at the end of the day, when it's like when the day is done and I'm at home, I'm kind of beginning to take off the armor and, put my guard down, really making sure that I am taking care of myself, that I'm nurturing myself. I had to make sure that I had people around me who were praying for me, who were supporting me, and I think every colleague of mine that's a female that I've talked to, we all have these conversations where it's like, you have to have not just people in your corner, like your friends, like you definitely need those, but you also need to make sure that you are taking time for yourself, because then, when you go back to church or when that phone rings or you get that email, you got to put that armor and everything right back on and, move forward and do the work. So that's my contribution. Pastor Knott, we're going to jump to you, and then hopefully we're going to squeeze in one more question and then wrap it up.
So Amanda, if you're not familiar with the older song, it's called "The Warrior is a Child." It's by Twyla Paris. You would like that. I won't go into detail on it, but it's "The Warrior is a Child." And, at the 2015 GC session, after the disappointment that many of us experienced there, the thing that helped us, kind of like what Pastor Hill and Pastor Kim were saying, is that we got back to work. Being in the GC meetings was hard, but then we got back to work. And my daughter, who grew up as a minister's daughter, she says to me, "Mom, you just be faithful at your job because you are a point in a data set." So there's a set of data, and when people are talking about female pastors, they need to be able to have a group of people they can point to say, "Hey, look at Pastor Kim or Pastor Hill or Pastor Amanda." So it's calling women, female pastors, to be faithful to the task that God has given them. And I love what Pastor Hill said, is that when people realize that we love Jesus and we want to build his kingdom, what's there to oppose in that? That's what we're called to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. One last question, kind of shifting gears a little bit, and it's a big one. So, I know we're kind of biting off a lot, for these few remaining minutes, but I'm like, let's do it. What is your perspective on the tension between conference administration in terms of career planning for women in ministry, and then the local church's readiness for female pastors? What's your perspective on that, and how do you handle it? So just to break it down a little bit, my words, sometimes I feel like there's a hot potato, where, and I'm not speaking about any one particular, conference, so this is just, what I see, looking out broadly, that, conferences can want to, hire, and they do hire, and they want to support, women in ministry. And then, when it comes to assignments and, moves, then, the church isn't ready. And so then it's like, the hot potato kind of shifts back and forth. What are your thoughts and perspectives? I call it a tension, because I think that it is.
So much to say here. This may seem far-fetched, but what the image that came to mind, I forgot her name, the lady when she was young, helped me out, that went to the school, integrated into the schools for the first time. Do you know what I'm talking about? And it was way long, she's still alive, but they decided to send her to an all-white school, right? And she was like the first Black woman to go. She was a student, and they pushed the issue, basically. I think that the tension is similar to that, because a lot of this talk about how we're treating women and giving women opportunities, it parallels with a lot of civil rights issues, and there's a lot of similarities. And so I guess that's where my mind went, that I guess the tension is administrators, conference administrators, and women in ministry. I guess we have to decide how willing are we to go into these churches that are in opposition to having women in ministry. I'm not here to say who should and who shouldn't, but I think that's maybe the conversation. Like, I'm willing to go as long, if the Lord is sending me to go into this lion's den, as it were, where it's a church. Because, I think there's a lot of conference administrators that are sincere. They do want to bring more women on board and expose more women, put more women in our churches, but they're also like terrified of putting women in these churches where they don't want the woman pastor. So I think it's probably a balance of how many women are willing to go into these spaces and begin to change the conversation, change the narrative. How much education and changing of perspectives are the administrators willing to do when it comes to these churches? I don't know. I think that's probably the conversation. It's frustrating though. It's incredibly frustrating when you hear your conference president say that, yes, we want to put you here, but they don't want you. It's disappointing. It's frustrating. It's angering. And part of you wants to be like, put me there, let me go. Okay, let me do something, and then part of you is like, I don't know, maybe because, Amanda, you're talking about self-care. Do I really want to put myself in that position where the whole church doesn't want me to be there? I don't know. So I'm not knocking any woman that's like, I'm good on that. And I'm also for women that are willing to say, I'm willing to go in that space and change the narrative. But it's a lot.
I think that there is tension, but I want to take it in a different direction. I think that conference administrators need to be led by the Holy Spirit. See, this is not our work. It's God's work. And it's a prayerful thing. I was placed in a congregation. I'm so blessed to be here, and I love my church. But in the inception, it was a tremendous challenge. There was, upheaval, but it was through prayer. And I believe that is where, there is this internal conflict, because there are so many possibilities of fallout. The congregation can die. Just so many things can happen. There's so many possibilities, so many variables. But in its quintessence, it's about being prayerful. The conference president and ministerial director, they need to pray. And if God says, Pastor Knott or Pastor Kim or Pastor Amanda, that is the woman. And no matter how it looks in the flesh, no matter how it looks in the initial stages, just trust me. And, maybe that is primitive godliness, but that is where it needs to be, right there. Just trusting God to lead in the direction, because there are so many local congregations that continue to oppose women. But I believe that God has raised up an army of women, and he has an assignment for all of them. And if we are going to hold back because of what we see in the natural, what we see in that moment, then that's the challenge. And so, it's a matter of very intense prayer. It takes a lot of courage and to trust God. And I want to thank God. I have a very supportive administration right here in the Bermuda Conference. Praise the Lord for that. And they are prayerful men of God. And that is what is required to really forge ahead in adversity, because that's a reality. And there are some local conferences where people are, just completely opposed to it. But if God has a work and he has a purpose, it's going to be revealed.
Yeah, I saw Pastor Knott, and then we'll go back to you.
Pastor Hill, I know you didn't just say that because your conference president is watching. I saw his name pop up. So one of the ways that the North American Division is trying to help is that, we have often seen that if a congregation gives a female pastor a try, the barriers start to be broken down. So the idea is, what can we do? What systems can we put in place to give them an opportunity? And so you may know that we have what's called the three-way split, where if a conference hires a female pastor, the conference pays a third of the salary and all of the benefits. The union puts in a third, and the division puts in a third. And over the last 5 years, we've been hiring about 20 women a year on this basis. And so it gives women an opportunity to serve and for people to observe them. And one of the ways this helps is that a local congregation who might be opposed, when they realize that instead of having a pastor over 2 churches, they may be able to get their very own pastor. Yes, she's a female, but it gives them a chance to see her at work. And this gives it's an opportunity, it's an incentive for the local church to give a female pastor a try.
Yeah. Pastor Kim.
I think that's awesome. I also wanted to say that I too have amazing support from my conference as well and from my church. And just transparently speaking, before I arrived, my understanding is that there were some conversations that were had to kind of prepare the congregation for having a woman as their pastor, and they were willing to, work through the tensions or any concerns that they had. And so I really appreciate the conference administration doing what they did on their part to make the process as smooth as possible. And I'm hoping that that happens even more across the NAD as well, to create, healthier spaces for women to do what God has called them to do. And then Pastor Knott, I had a question. So when you said that 4% of pastors are 4% of women, 4% of pastors are women in the, is it the NAD or is it the GC when you made that?
In the North American division.
And that includes the system that you have where you're able to hire more women with the 3-way split. It's still 4%.
Yes, we're getting women come and they go, so it's not a consistent number. Sometimes they take time out because they have a child, or depending upon what their spouse's job is. So, and one way that I'd like all the women that are listening and the men to help is that at the North American division, we are trying to have a complete directory of women who are pastors. You may remember Pastor Brenda Belingi is the one that most recently have held the position of caring for our female clergy. So we do have a database. It is very hard to keep it current, but if we can all submit names of women that we know as pastors, when I see somebody on Facebook that's just become a pastor somewhere, I try to turn that in to the division office. But we can all help by doing that. And then the other thing is, I made a note earlier, if we had like a speakers directory, so that when people are looking for a female, who do we know that is an expert in this topic, so that we can kind of have a database for that I think would help also. Yeah. Oh, and Pastor Kim, we also have chaplains who are specialized pastors, and I think that would bump the number up to more than just 4%. When we did that, we were looking at people who were pastors in a local congregation.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question. Has there been women associate pastors working under women senior pastors?
Yes. Yes, there have been and are.
Sure, that's cool.
that's another topic, y'all. That's
a whole seminar right there.
Right. All these spin-off conversations, the dynamics between senior and assistant pastors. Man, ladies, this has been a great conversation. I was excited from jump. Just to know that we were going to be discussing and tackling some of these issues. And there's so many takeaways that are coming from this. But I want to thank each of you, Pastor Knott, Pastor Hill, Pastor Bulgin. Thank you for your time. Thank you for speaking honestly, and sharing your heart, your perspective. And I really hope that those that are watching, that it just gives you further insight, further understanding into, all of these dynamics. We were intentional about that word because there's not a one size fits all answer. Depending on where you are, depending on, your experience, your talents, your gifting, there's so many variables that impact the progression of women in ministry. We know that it's definitely an all hands on deck, type of thing in terms of support, at every level, so we thank you, Pastor Knott, for what you're doing at, the NAD, extremely supportive of women in ministry, the conferences that are represented here, Northeastern, Central States, Bermuda Conference, and the others, there's many others. And then of course, the members, the churches that also, are really on the ground with the pastors. So it's something that, it's an all hands on deck type thing, but, we continue to move forward, as was said, knowing what God has called all of us to do, knowing the gifts that he has given us. So I thank you all. We're definitely, I know Pastor Dr. Wilson is here. So, whatever kind of follow-up conversations, there's a lot of spinoffs, that we can have. But again, thank you so much, ladies. And thank you all for joining. Just want to remind you all one more time that registration for PELP 2020, it is open. So visit the website, www.pelc2020.com, and you can register. Early bird registration is open right now. It's only $19. So want to make sure you register now. That is until the end of this month. Then the regular registration fee will be available. It's going to be a phenomenal virtual event, but there's still going to be dynamic preaching, solid teaching and equipping, and of course, amazing worship opportunities. So again, thank you all. Last but not least, make sure you join us at our next dialogue. It's going to be on November 3rd. We're going to be talking about grief and loss. Thank you, everybody, for being a part. May God bless you and keep you. Take care.
God bless you.